measured not in hours but in breath.
Just need to get started somewhere. And I'm actually really quite excited because it is, for me, a tremendous honor to have this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you.
And maybe to put a little bit of context around that for people that are not aware, and to introduce you in the way that I got to know you and how I ended up in this situation, is that I'm trying to think the exact moment. It's somewhere on my journey of where I was looking into some podcasts, some information on Ashtanga, that I ran into a podcast of yours.
Okay.
And it was kind of like the first time that I heard somebody openly talk about mystical experiences, mystical states, and how yoga is a system that can, in a controlled manner, get us to these kinds of states, and that for me really got me super interested, that there was somebody that actually explaining and talking about this. And then I went online to look for your books, and the first moment, at that moment, synchronistically, I went on like the Dutch eBay, and I found like a collection of all your books basically. For like 50 euros. Somebody wanted to get rid of that, but that's their loss. And it's like all the books on the one on pranayama, the meditation, the samadhi, the how to find your life purpose. And then I bought the book on psychedelics because or drugs in general, because that also has a special triggering moment for me, which we will get into. But basically, the way that I got to understand the yoga system through your books, and kind of like got me to tremendously appreciate like how valuable this knowledge is, and that it's actually still intact for as much as like that is possible over the years of passing on this type of information. And the way that you also talk about yoga and the asanas just being one limb of the eight, and explaining the entire context around it, it just like everything started clicking. I felt like, oh, this is like this is what I need to pay attention to.
Okay.
And so I built you up in this, and then also with you talking about your mystical experience, I built you up in a very big way in my mind,
Okay.
of like a role model in a certain way without really knowing you. And now there was this opportunity that presented itself, that things worked out to join a month of yoga in here on this gorgeous island, La Gomera. Never heard of before, but I just went for it. It's kind of like a really interesting experience, in where I'm also just realizing you're human just as much. Right? You build somebody up in your mind with this kind of knowledge, and like how incredibly thorough you are in your work, and how you present everything. It's just to frame a little bit like how important this moment is for me, that I'm having this opportunity to talk with you. I'm not sure if there's anything that you picked up on this that you would like to respond to, or because I know.
Well, it's good that you recognize that I'm completely human. I certainly don't try to pretend otherwise. It's a problem if we try to build up spiritual teachers to be somehow superhuman. And it's a huge problem that often spiritual teachers try to instill that themselves, that they are superhuman. They like to be treated especially. I'm certainly not one of them.
Yeah, no, it's incredible how humble you are indeed, like just in the normal interaction and also in and I'm not necessarily like the whole yoga thing it's much more like I'm into it now for about 2 years. Before that I never really showed interest in it. I had one introduction to it that got me in a very intense meditative state after it, and I know that if I reach a certain meditative state my body starts shaking a lot, and then I know that something is happening. And I had that after my very first Ashtanga lesson, and I just knew like, okay, this is powerful stuff. This is something I need to pay attention to and get onwards with. And I just started to stay with it. It just became like this cornerstone now of my life that I cannot miss anymore. If I'm not doing yoga for a few days, I lose the idea that all the balls that I try to keep in the air, I feel like they're dropping, that I'm losing. It's just I wouldn't really be able to live without it anymore. But I also not that much of like a super yogi that I even remember all the names of the asanas. Maybe as a quick thing, I was actually curious, doesn't necessarily need to be on the camera, but how important is it that you remember all these names? Or is there like a...
there is probably no deeper mystical meaning to it. In Ashtanga, we call the postures by their Sanskrit names. That's just names that we use. And so the advantage of knowing the Sanskrit names is, if I say to you, in Trikonasana you need to do this and this and this, that you then know what it is. Generally speaking, I think in modern yoga there is a bit of a tendency to say Sanskrit has become irrelevant, and it's absolutely unnecessary to learn anything about it. Look, when I was young, I spent a lot of time in India. I traveled there 15 times in total. I spent there 5 years. From that point of view, I think it's colonialist to say that there's no deeper meaning to it. I think that there's sort of like an unfortunate tendency of Western people to just go and pillage and take out of it what they want to use and discard the rest. I think yoga has deserved better. So for me, my personal attitude is that I'm very grateful, that was kept alive for such a long time in Indian culture, that even, in the 20th century I still could go and the flame was still burning to some extent. And so I'm trying to keep that and keep yoga authentic for as long as possible. That's why I do use a lot of Sanskrit in my teaching. The other thing is, maybe with the posture names it's not that super important, but it's more important when we go to yoga philosophy, because a lot of the English in yoga, there is a greater bandwidth when it comes to terms that describe the mind. For example, in English we have only the mind. Like in Sanskrit there's a whole lot of different terms, aspects of the mind. So let's put it like that. Sanskrit is a language that is very helpful when talking about mysticism. Whereas English is more truncated. So English is not... You could say that Sanskrit in some ways is a language that is constructed around spirituality and is constructed around spiritual experiences, and to be able to discuss them in a technical and scholarly fashion, you can say that this is what the language is for.
It's awesome.
Whereas it's not very, it's too cumbersome, too complicated and too clunky to talk in everyday about everyday matters. That's why in India it's only used to discuss spiritual things. Even in monasteries, the Sanskrit is used to discuss spiritual things, let's say spiritual doctrine, the scriptures. And then when it comes to day-to-day matter, who cleans the bathroom, it's usually one switches to Hindi.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's for me it was in my life it was very important to have a certain understanding of Sanskrit. But
Okay.
I think it's more important
I
for my teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it's important for students to know all of the terms. I think it's super important. The main thing is, there is a lot of really complex terms. To mind comes buddhi for intellect, or manas, which is one of the many terms for mind, or even when we use the Ayurvedic terms vata, pitta, kapha, they are so readily translated into phlegm, bile and wind. But if we do that, we sort of have three labels that we can easily hold on to because we know them, but the meaning is taken out because the terms are so much more complex. Yeah. So I think it's better to keep using the Sanskrit terms and to realize, well, I don't really know what that means. I think that's actually more helpful to keep yourself sort of in a state of not knowing and wonder potentially, rather than think, I know what bile is.
Yeah. Okay.
Bang. So then you can't keep learning.
Yeah. I like it. That's my personal way probably that I go about as well. It's really much more about feeling what it does energetically to you, the practice, instead of trying to get the whole theory exactly right and everything around. Okay, awesome. That's great. Where I kind of want to go towards with this conversation is that these books that I started reading of yours, there were a few key concepts, and especially the one in the How to Find Your Life's Purpose, the Panchakosha model. These 5 layers that that was like just the right information in the right time. It's very simplistic, but it did something. It really made something click, and I kind of started to refer to them. I think Rudolf Steiner does it in the same way as like an onion model, and how basically we are all connected in the core of that onion, and then there's different layers that grow out of that core, and then those different layers I started to align them with the 5 levels of the Panchakosha model, and where it's the bliss body, the wisdom body, the mental body, energetic body, and the physical body, and that everything kind of grows from that core is basically a key concept that I'm using here, that things really grow out of. And I'm curious because I've also noticed in one other podcast of yours where you mentioned that let's call it God now. I personally, and I like also how you framed it in this book, the Ishta Devata.
Yes.
Like everybody has their own Ishta Devata to refer to what they see as the ultimate reality. I personally, in my book, refer to it as Source. I'm not sure the way you prefer to it or like to refer to it, but you've also, in some context, some conversation, I heard you refer to it as something that's externally having some influence on you. And I'm personally really, what I got from your reading, my personal interpretation of it is that it's internally, and that your physicality is like your physical body is growing from that core, and that you can connect to like this sea of information, the wisdom body, and that's where if you even go deeper, you get to the level of the source of God, the ultimate reality, and that it kind of that you're able to communicate with it by going within and not by taking something from the outside world. Is there any way for yourself that you make sense of this explanation or relate to it?
Yes, so I guess the thing is when we sort of go on the hunt for the divine, this is sort of like very much like maybe like an indigenous hunter goes in the forest and to hunt some prey. Then when we get our first taste of it, that might be a little bit like when we fall in love for the first time. That first experience may set us up in some ways, write our neurological pathway for how we are approaching the divine in the future. Yeah? And so the important thing is to not limit ourselves to that, because there is many different ways in which the divine can be experienced, and if we choose different pathways, our experience of the divine will become more mature. So there is a danger in thinking the very first mystical experience that you have, that's it. It's like the Buddha once told the story of the 4 blind men, where an elephant was brought in, and the king said, "Tell me what the elephant is." And one got hold of the trunk and said, "The elephant is a tube." One got hold of the legs and said, "The elephant is a tree trunk." Another one got hold of an ear and said, "The elephant is a piece of paper." Another one got the tail and said, "The elephant is a brush," and so on. So in that regard, often when we have the very first experience, we say, bang, this is how it is, and we don't question further. And this is even when you go through the history of mysticism over the whole history of humanity, there's a strong tendency for that. It's like, all right, I've seen it, bang, this is what it is for me. Now, there's a very important stanza in the Bhagavad Gita, in the stanza 7.2, where Lord Krishna says, "I now teach you the jnana and the vijnana, after which nothing remains to be known." They're very mysterious, words, but there were several spiritual teachers in India, namely Paramahamsa Ramakrishna and Sri Aurobindo, who said this is one of the pivotal stanzas of the Gita, where he hangs up his own teaching, Krishna, that is. And so what that means is that, when we start on a spiritual path, at some point we come across jnana, that is self-realization. But Krishna says after that comes vijnana, that is divine revelation. So vijnana also means, so jnana you can translate as essential knowledge, and vijnana as comprehensive knowledge or complex realization. And so Paramahamsa Ramakrishna said about that it means the sequential realization of the Saguna and the Nirguna Brahman. Let me explain those terms. So the Nirguna means formless. The Nirguna is the formless absolute. So that is pure consciousnus. That is what the Buddha described as nirvana, or what Lao Tzu described as the Tao, or what is in the Upanishads often called the Brahman, the deep reality. Yes. And the Saguna Brahman is the divine with form. That is, for example, to see the entire material cosmos as the divine. Or the Abrahamic religions, or in India also the cult of Krishna, focus on the divine with form. Now Ramakrishna said that vijnana is the sequential realization of both, because you can't understand, they can't reveal themselves to you at the same time. Now, later in the Gita, in the 14th chapter, Krishna goes into more detail, and he says that there are 3 different types of God realization. So as you go on with the Gita, every chapter, there's 18 chapters to the Gita, every time he goes a notch up and gives a more complex teaching. After his student Arjuna has sort of like come to terms with the earlier teaching, then he leads him deeper into the mystery. And so in the 14th chapter he says there's 3 different types of vijnana, or you could say God realizations, plural. It's good to use a plural. And they're called, I won't use the Sanskrit terms to not alienate too much. So they are unity, difference, and multiplicity. Yeah, and so unity would be to realize that there is something that we all share. Yeah. So, for example, that we realize that the deepest layer of our psyche, sometimes in the Upanishad called the Atman, there is only one Atman, and we share that Atman. So when I look into your eyes, I see the same Atman looking back at me that I see also in me, and that is of course the source of compassion, the source of non-harmlessness, because I realize essentially we are the same soul, the whole of humanity, in fact all living beings participate of the same soul. Yeah. And so this is this unity. Yeah. And so sometimes people talk about this being one with everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
To realize, wow, is the ability to disconnect from your surface self and to fall into the deep layers of your psyche and realize there is an infinite presence that is in every being. Yeah. Now, there's a very, very different experience to that, which is called difference, and that is, in a lot of religions, there is talk of being afraid of God, or at least being in awe. Yeah? So for me, for example, I realized that, I'm a conscious entity, but in this universe, I embody as this 6 feet tall body, yeah. Whereas the divine embodies as a sum total of all parallel universes, of which there's almost an infinite number. That's some goddamn difference. Like the difference alone between my body and a galaxy, or even a solar system, yeah, and a universe is much, much bigger than just a galaxy, and a galaxy is humongously huge, yeah. And so then, so first that the physical difference, yeah? And so secondly, the difference in intelligence. Yeah? So I have a limited intelligence. It's just about enough to actually power this 6 feet tall body to walk it more or less effectively through this world, and to make sure that it doesn't die in a hurry. So my intelligence is capable of that, and then beyond that maybe reading some books and reflecting of that. But if I look out and I look at, how a galaxy, for example, is constructed, how it rotates in space around a supermassive black hole, how new stars are formed, how planets are formed, how on planets grow intelligent life forms, etc. So how elementary particles know how to be themselves. So the amount of, so there's the difference, I'm in absolute awe of being this dwarf with having this absolute minute chip between my ears, yeah, whereas the intelligence of the cosmos is cosmic. Yeah? So this is the difference. Yeah. So in other words, it's important to realize our unity with the divine, and that is correct and that is important, because in the Gita Krishna says, I'm the self in the heart of all beings. Yeah? But also realize that in the embodied state we are minute. We are like a microbe in a humongous infinite being that is nevertheless contributing, but that's the difference. So these things must be both seen simultaneously.
Yeah.
And so, to just finish that thought off, the third type of vijnana or God realization that Krishna mentions in the 14th chapter is the multiplicity. Yeah, and that is the realization that the divine has taken on a particular path through which it embodies through me, but it has taken on a completely different path through you, and through every other being, and through every other living form, and through the world of objects. That's the multiplicity, to realize that, wow, this divine has taken actually on an infinity of paths, of which I'm only like one out of a trillion.
Yeah. Yeah, my personal way of relating to that is like this type of fractal Mandelbrot set that kind of like creates all of that
Absolutely
thing, and these are of course also these kind of psychedelic
yeah.
patterns that you would recognize in things going on, and what I tried to do is like I overlaid that model, and I'm quite curious to think what you think of this. If you would overlay that Panchakarya model to this Mandelbrot set, I kind of started to think it in such a way that all these little fractals at the outer edge of it, that multitude of like possibilities, that is like some type of way to relate to it as a physicalness.
That's an interesting concept. Yes.
And that it kind of does in a way that comes to that core, because also you can, if you go in one of these things, you also keep on infinitely coming these repeating patterns, and you see God continuously in all of it. Like it's like this beautiful way to, and I think that's a nice way to segue also a little bit into the next thing, where like I want to take it a bit to psychedelics as a topic and these kinds of experiences, because this key realization that really helps me, just for me myself in my associative way of my brain works, helps to make a lot of sense of things. And there's one particular experience on LSD that gave me kind of like this experience in an emotional way, in a way that's not that I was not able to put into words back then. But then after I kind of read your stuff and started to put some things together, and I was able to kind of give words to that impressive experience. And also in, I think, your meditation book, you talk about one of your mystical experiences where I don't think it was necessarily psychedelically induced, but you also had this experience of like seeing this multitude of galaxies being created, and like seeing that happen. Is and I reflect also that how similar my personal experience on LSD was to that natural experience that you shared over there. Is that what you, and also to maybe align it with your previous answers and what you have explained, is there any relation to that, and maybe to also go into like how trustworthy an LSD experience is on this compared to a natural?
So this particular experience that I had with galaxies, do you mean? Okay,
exactly.
All right. So yes. So all right. So this particular experience, I had a very spiritual and mystical childhood. So I was looking and having as far as I can look back as a child, I was searching for spiritual experiences. Yeah? And that was always the main interest in my life. And I got introduced to psychedelics when I was 16 years old. And so the main, and I took a lot of psychedelics between 16 and 19. And then after that, I largely finished. I stopped taking them because I felt that while I saw a lot, I couldn't integrate it, I couldn't embody it, and ultimately they didn't change who I was. Yeah, so it was something that was sort of like intellectual, yeah, but it wasn't embodied. It didn't make me, for example, a kinder or a humbler or more supportive person. Yeah. So, and now after I had given up on psychedelics, because I couldn't integrate the experiences, yeah, I spent a lot of time by myself in the forest, simply meditating, fasting, and reflecting on the scriptures, particularly the Upanishads. And I did that for quite a while, and I was probably 20, and by 20 I was so totally frustrated because I felt that I didn't make any progress. This is sort of like typical state of a 20-year-old. You think, I was sort of like, how do you say, like a bull in the china shop, sort of banging at God's door, let me in, thinking that, well, I've done this now for half a year, surely I should have made progress. Anyway, so there was this total moment of despair, where I sort of realized for the first time, I can't do that by myself. Yeah. And while I was I would, if you had asked me what my belief system at the time was, I would have probably called myself an atheist and mainly a Buddhist. Yeah. I was not comfortable with the concept of God, mainly because I had a Catholic upbringing, where God was always looked at as a giant anthropomorphic white-bearded male in the sky that had serious personality problems with anger and so on, and so on. He needed a lot of money constantly, and etc. And so nevertheless, I came to this point, being about 20 years old, where I had this absolute despair, and I said, I can't do it by myself, and I was asking, whatever is out there, please help. Yeah. And so I had this total, it was actually like dark, it was in the middle of the forest, and there was a clearing, beautiful clearing, I still remember it, and I was lying, and there was a starry sky overhead, and I was like lying on the floor like that, please help, give me a sign. Yeah. And so suddenly it was as if, it was not as, I didn't see a giant hand, but it is as if was a zipper went across the sky and the fabric was being pulled apart. And I suddenly saw an infinite presence, infinite in space, eternal in time. And it wasn't anthropomorphic, it was a presence that literally breathed forth an infinite number, an eternal sequence of universes, and reabsorbed them at the same time after they had gone through a certain cycle of existence. And in all of these universes were an infinity of beings, and I was one of them, and I was just suddenly, holy crap, this is just unbelievable. And so in some ways, that experience, in some ways I would say, experience did send me on the way. It was sort of like, for 45 minutes I could see that and I could partake of it.
Wow, so long.
It took a very, very long time, and what was very shocking after that was that afterwards I was miserable. Eventually it's unbelievable, yeah. Sort of like the absolute lack of humility in my hindsight now. You know, if it would happen now, I would just probably spend a year on my knees saying thank you. Yeah, but back then, is I got up. It's like, where you gone? Where have you gone? I can't see you anymore. You know, show yourself. Yeah, and it was almost like as if the doors, the pearly gates had snapped shut. I was locked outside and I couldn't get in. Yeah, so I was actually, it's a bit like when you fall in love, yeah, and your beloved rejects you. You're actually more miserable than before having fallen in love. This was my state. Yeah, and sort of it was really then that I thought, I need some serious help, and that's why then I packed up and went to India. Yeah. Yeah, so
some serious help in order to reach that.
Yeah, I felt that I needed to have human teachers who can instruct me in a more methodical approach.
Exactly.
Yeah, in a methodical approach. Yeah, and so I guess this was exactly the same that got me to stop with psychedelics. You know, because psychedelics was always like, oh wow.
Was that experience?
This wasn't a psychedelic. This was about half a year
but this experience got you to stop.
Oh. No, I had stopped already. Like I can't remember. It's a long time ago. It's more than 40 years ago. I had probably stopped psychedelics about 8 months before. You know, so this experience there reflected already sort of like a greater degree of humility, you know, where it's like, please help, you know. So the psychedelics, of course. And
in your psychedelic experience, did you ever have anything that resembles this type of natural experience? Because for me, it was super relatable.
Similar things, yeah. It wasn't quite as powerful. And I guess the mere fact that it wasn't caused by psychedelics, but it was sort of like almost bestowed in some way by an intelligence outside of me, made it more powerful. And it sort of lasted also for a very long time, which psychedelic experience usually is like, and then there's the next thing, and then there's again the next thing. Yeah. So, but yeah, you know, I guess, seeing that we have started to talk about that subject, I'm quite concerned about the new wave of psychedelics. Yeah, just because back then I've seen the vastly different ways how people can react to it. You know, and I've sort of like come to understand I had a very robust reaction, but I've seen people crumble basically and take harm from a single dose, and that is if they had some form of undiagnosed bipolar or depersonalization disorder or schizophrenia. That's the worst. And I guess, you know, you never really know. You know, sometimes they sort of institutes now in South America, they say, oh, we have an on-site psychologist who will screen you, but you can't rule out exactly. You can't how a person reacts.
Nice. Yeah, so we'll pick that up later on, like how yoga is this a controlled way to still have these types of experiences. But I would like to still stick a little bit longer with the impact of a psychedelic experience, and where you have stated that you don't really learn, you don't change because of it right after the experience. I agree there, but in my personal experiences with LSD in particular, it did put me on a certain trajectory. So my very first experience that I mentioned also in the introduction of the book, and why I wrote this book, is basically like, for me, in that, as if I in that moment had just had that experience and I didn't really know what was going on, then here's like a guide that gives you like a few answers of what might have happened there. But basically what it triggered in me was this back up a little bit. I had, through that experience, this higher level of realizing an interconnectedness to everything, and I was going through a little bit of what you could probably explain as a bad trip. That it was a bit anxious around all of it, like what is happening to me, and that was emphasized by this internal discussion that the drugs are making me crazy, or this is a natural thing, and the drug is enabling this to me. And I came out of that experience with wanting to prove to myself that this must have been a natural experience, and if it's natural what I have experienced, then there must also be natural ways to get there, and it's not, and if it would be the drug that's making me crazy, then it's only this experience here right now uniquely with this drug, because that's what's making me crazy. And that's how it got me on what I believe is my spiritual awakening, my trigger to pursue frameworks, philosophies, methods to still achieve that same type of experience.
Okay, I guess that was then like a positive result. And I think that like Sam Harris, the neuroscientist, describes a similar experience where psychedelics gave him the trust that there is something spiritual out there, and he pursued it then afterwards, and as far as I know he teaches meditation today, and so if that gives you the trust, then it's probably worth it. The thing is, I believe that these cases are actually in the minority. Like, for example, if you read the book from Dr. Daniel Strassman, the DMT, the spirit molecule, he was a medical doctor and psychiatrist who obtained permission from the FBI and the FDA to perform legal psychedelic experiments with live American specimens. And such a permission is, of course, extremely hard to obtain. And so he pursued that then for a few years, and eventually he gave his license back. And he said that the reason why he gave it back is because he had the great hope that a lot of people that he turned on to psychedelics would pick up a traditional form of spiritual practice afterwards. And he did spiritual experiments with, I think it was 147 people, and not a single one did. Yeah. So this is also my observation. You know, I've sort of like most psychedelic use that I have personally witnessed took place in a setting like Ken Kesey's The Kool-Aid acid trip, or a hedonistic setting, where it was just about having fun and just notching up the fun a bit, you know, by making it all more colorful, you know. And so I haven't witnessed a lot, and the problem is also, ultimately, that needs to be understood, is that spiritual experiences are karma driven. Yeah. So that means if you have serious obstacles in your way why you can't have spiritual experiences, you need to sort of like dismantle the karma, chip it away, and put a new karma in place. And that, like all traditional cultures, would tell you that you're looking down the barrel of 10 years work or potentially several decades. Yeah. And of course, in our Western culture is very much this attitude, I want to have it all and I want to have it now. Yeah. And that of course is totally an obstacle when it comes to spirituality, because if you listen to the statement, it is about me wanting to have. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter whether I have more money, more power, or more friends on social media, or more spiritual experiences. I want to have. It's a greedy form of snatching. Yeah. Whereas at the core of all mystical transformation is the realization that I want to give. Yeah, I want to give to the blossoming and healing of other beings, as much as possible, and possibly the realization, or hopefully the realization, I don't need any more spiritual experiences. Please give them somebody else. Please give them somebody more deserving. Yeah. So that is a good attitude when it comes to spirituality, and also the realization that our culture is very much about taking something without giving something in return. Yeah, this sort of Western civilization. Of course, you see ecological breakdown in the whole world. That is caused by this attitude, that we go and pillage cultures, we go and pillage ecosystems, we go and pillage species, we cut our rainforest, turn them into feedlots for cattle, etc., etc. It's this pillaging. And of course, us folks, Westerners, have very much done also that with spirituality, and of course the psychedelics is a big part of that. Okay, let's brush away 10,000 years of spiritual culture on the planet. We have a chemical. There is a pill that costs you $10. You pop it, and you shortcut, you hack. All of these efforts that indigenous people and traditional people had to perform. We are smarter. Yeah, and so if you work on this whole subject for a really long time, hopefully, then you realize that it's about the energy that you put into it. Yeah. You will eventually be rewarded. You will eventually be rewarded 1,000-fold. But important is to get away from this. Let me pay $10, and let me just see it all, and then whoever will I become? You will become nobody, because the transformative effect of a spiritual realization is powered by the karma, by the work that you have put into it. That's what determines the psyche. That's why the Native Americans have this beautiful saying, don't tell us what you have experienced. We will observe you and see simply from your behavior what you have understood. Meaning, if you're somebody who gives more than they take, then we have understood that you have a very high spiritual understanding. Because ultimately, you don't want to go out of this world owing somebody. Yeah? But you want to go out of this world having given everything.
Nice. Yeah. So to summarize a bit, and then we'll take it into the direction of the clean way to go about it. Is that in general what the way that it has been for me can be seen as an exception and a statistical outlier, and and it was definitely not the magical pill that gave it to me right then, right there. It put me up, and now I feel that eventually that was exactly the thing that clicked with the books, like your books. It made me like that promise that I made to myself on I want to find out what if I can reach, if this is real, then I should be able to reach it in a different way. I felt like, okay, it's all written down here. These books do give that, but then the work starts, right?
Yes, the work starts.
Then it's not that pill created that moment and made me absorb all those books. So I think indeed then in general, as a takeaway for people that are listening to this, it's probably not recommended to, like, this is the recommended approach.
Yes. So
right?
the thing is basically, if you look at the details, like there is of course something called psychedelic induced psychosis, and the way how you look in yoga at that is that it is caused by some of the higher chakras being chemically opened. That is possible, and if some of your lower chakras are closed, then a psychedelic psychosis can take place. Particularly if your power chakra and your heart chakra is closed.
Yeah, it's even dangerous to.
Yes, exactly. And then you have the Vishuddha or the Ajna chakra open. You will see things that you cannot integrate. So in this case, if somebody has these chakras closed, for example, through my spiritual work, I discovered to my great shock that I hated myself. Like I didn't. If you would have asked me when I was 20 years old, I think I'm great. But that wasn't true. Like under all of this artificial ego, this bluster, this security, this certainty outwardly, actually underneath that was a deep-seated self-loathing, self-hatred, lack of self-esteem, which I inherited from my ancestors. We are a great 10,000-year-old lineage of self-haters, my folks. And of course, like if you do not respect and if you do hate yourself, that expresses itself in self-destructiveness. So that means you could theoretically drive yourself mad because you hate yourself, and stuff like that breaks out. Let's say if you take a mega dose of LSD and then suddenly you realize, I really hate myself. This is an unfortunate moment in which the realization surfaces. And so and also, you probably would want to do some therapy beforehand. You have to come to terms with that. And also, if you are in conflict with people around you, if you ever hate somebody else, or if you hate certain people, or if there is somebody in the public arena that you really loathe, what it really is, it's an externalized inner conflict that you actually have with yourself. And so all of that would have to be worked through before one engages in psychedelics. So now the obvious thing is, once you've worked through all of that, once you have learned the skill of activating chakras and integrating their what I would call evolutionary brain circuitry, once you have sort of understood the operating system of the human psyche, there's no more need to take psychedelics because you know how to do. So this is the paradox, Before you can do that, it's actually not really safe. I was very lucky, probably like undeservedly so, that I didn't take any serious damage, considering what I did to myself. But it did send me on the path, But then for decades I was, practicing yoga, And so the yoga then got me to a point where I could bring all of these states about consciously. Yeah. And then I realized, well, you know what? There's absolutely no need to take psychedelics anymore, because I can then produce those states. I can go into them consciously.
Nice. It creates a perfect segue and an end to this chapter. Beautifully summarized. But like the work that you were describing, the emotional baggage and injuries and that you need to work through, like I personally describe it as inner work. And I completely agree with all those things. The one thing that I'm curious about, like, in how far is this an intellectual pursuit, the inner work, the trying to make sense of like where certain things are coming from, what kind of injuries you've got passed on through your ancestors, to like do you need to understand that intellectually, or is that something that can be completely worked through the system of yoga? Because, for example, I myself, before this, I finished like a little bit of a coaching period in the past 6 months of doing some intense inner work, and I personally believe I don't really see that yoga would have got me to realize these things as well, as compared to being in conversation with a teacher on these things. But maybe that's also yoga and an interaction that you have with your guru. I'm not sure what you...
So, you know, in order to understand that, it might be good if we look at the connection in yoga, that we see the body, the prana, which is the life force, and the mind have, yeah? And so they can be understood like the states of aggregation in physics. For example, if you have water and you bring it to the boil, it turns into vapor, and that means you energize it to such an extent that the particles become faster and faster. They breach the surface, and then it's a vapor.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the qualities of vapor, it's highly energetic. Yeah, you can power steam engines with it, for example. You can turn it into motion, but it dissipates very quickly, so it's very fickle also. You know, and then when you de-energize water, and it eventually becomes crystalline, it becomes ice. Yeah. And so in ice it has the least thermic energy in it. Yeah? So you can say it's de-energized water. Yeah? And so, but in all of these three states of aggregation, the substance is actually the same, H2O. Yeah? And so we use that as a metaphor in yoga to understand or to explain the connection between the mind, the pranic level, and the body. Yeah? So, in other words, the body is the crystalline strata. It's the ice. The prana is the water, the liquid state, and the mind is the steam state, the energized state. So, in other words, your body is nothing but de-energized or slowed down mind.
Yes.
You could say psychological experience that eventually has become tissue,
Crystallized.
and the mind is accelerated body. It's accelerated physical tissue, and so and in between is of course the pranic level, and the reason why the mind, the steam will always go through the liquid state before it hits the crystalline state, and vice versa. That's why in yoga we put particular emphasis on managing the pranic level through what's called pranayama breathing exercises, yogic breathing exercises. But important is, if we look at the transformation of the human being, we would always look at the mind and the body connected. Yeah. So that means if you want to get rid of our past, let me use an IT metaphor, rewrite our psychological software, rewrite our psychological operating system, then we would look at both the body and the mind, because destructive or painful or traumatic programs that are lodged in us from the past are lodged in both body and mind. And if we attend to only one area, they're likely to reboot. Therefore, it is both. Yeah, there should be an intellectual process. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
There should be, but there needs to be an energetic process. There needs to be a physical process also.
Yeah. Nice. And the intellectual process, does yoga provide it, or would you need to look for that outside of yoga?
I think yoga does a very good job with that, but from studying yogic philosophy, I have become like a little child. I'm very curious, so whenever I have extra time, I will study evolutionary theory, I will study biology, I will study astrophysics, quantum physics, I will study psychology, however much I can, because of course the yoga, you could say, leads also to an awakening of the intellect, and it leads to an increase of memory, and it leads to an increase in intellectual computational power. So you suddenly like, oh wow, I can actually read a textbook on quantum physics and I can suddenly understand it, which I couldn't before. Yeah. So it's certainly very helpful. Awesome. And I think that the mind, once it is unshackled, so to say, because when I was young, I felt very limited, very much because my upbringing didn't encourage me a lot. There was always negative feedback, you're not good enough. Yeah, and also my natural curiosity was systematically destroyed, because the education process was very punitive. It was always like, well, you're not really a HD level here, high distinction, your academic grades aren't high enough, so it was always punitive, and so now I think that we can awaken the intelligence with yoga, so that we become very curious, and suddenly it becomes very natural that we want to study all of these disciplines.
And also understand yourself more.
Yeah, through that, of course, absolutely.
I've never looked at it that way. But I definitely see, and I can definitely relate to it myself, that it helped.
Yeah.
That it helps tremendously also. Yeah. And not only that it awakens, but also that it gives you the extra creativity and focus and optimism to just engage with all of that. Nice. We are kind of like running, I guess, on time to keep this within limits also. So I would like to maybe kind of draw it to some kind of concluding chapter, in where just the flow of this conversation brought everything that I wanted to discuss out beautifully and in a very, very nice and organic way. And I kind of want to start with this, what for me is the beginning of the book, where we touched on it somewhere in the middle of our conversation, that I had put myself on this quest to figure out the natural way to reach a mystical experience, mystical state, and that through your books I felt like this is what I need to follow. This is it. But I would be curious if you could maybe give some type of just a step-wise process for people that maybe not are completely aware of everything you've already written and spoken about, on kind of what it takes to reach certain levels of the different limbs. So the asana that works for the physical body, the pranayama for the energy body, and the meditation for the mental body. How you would need to develop them, how you need to combine them in such a way, how much time does that take in order to maybe get to some point where you could have samadhi, like have like naturally induced mystical experiences.
So there is an interesting model, or something I would use as a model that is a part of the Vedic system, and that is called the system of the ashramas, which means stages of life. They have particular Sanskrit terms, but we don't need to recite the Sanskrit terms. But basically, there are 4 phases that one goes through in one's life, which are student, householder, forest dweller or grandparent ashrama, and then mystic or saint. And so the idea behind that is to, right from the beginning, introduce a certain degree of patience, and also to understand that one paces oneself, that you can't become an elder at 20. Like in indigenous culture, for example, you can become an elder when you have received experience a certain wisdom, you're radiating out a certain wisdom, but it also comes with having reached a certain age, and that is simply because if you've reached a certain age, it will always mean that you have experienced a certain degree of loss in your life, because people who used to be senior to you have now moved on. That has, left, put you through a certain hurt, and that loss has softened your heart, and so that's why you're now called an elder. And so important is that when we start this path, that we want to get rid of the attitude, I want to have it all and I want to have it now. And so the idea is you'll get it all eventually. And so accept that you're going to go through a certain process, so there's going to be certain phases in life where it's good to attend to certain things and later on to others. And so you don't have to necessarily follow this scheme, but a natural scheme would be that you work from the outside in, that you work from these 5 layers inwards, and that would be to first sequentially work on removing limitations in the body. That means in the first phase of your yoga you may focus on asana, on physical practice, and so that may take a certain time. The time that takes depends very much on your karma, on your past. For example, in my case, I had to do quite a few years extra because I had sort of like, let's say, very severely worn out my astral body through drug and psychedelic use. That needed to get fixed, and then there were problems that from before, ancestral problems, etc. You work on all of that, and so it's not a bad idea to focus on asana. That doesn't mean that you have to, but if you feel so inclined, then that should be encouraged. And after you have created a certain foundation, you continue the work on asana, and you put the pranic work on top by adding more pranayama. And so when you come to that point, at every point in that journey, you realize that it liberates certain energies that were trapped. So don't think now, oh my God, how can I ever do that much yoga? I remember thinking about that in the beginning, but it happens automatically. As you go deeper into it, you sort of realize, oh wow, that works. Actually, what I really want to do? I want to do yoga. Because it has shown itself to me that it does actually work. And so at a second phase, then you add the school of pranayama, and at a third phase you add then the meditation, the yogic meditation school is the school that deals with chakra awakening. Yeah? And so then you add what's called chakra kundalini meditation. Yeah? There's a powerful technique. Preferably you have prepared yourself through asana and pranayama. Yeah? And then once you have achieved proficiency in that, then that means that you can now fixate the prana, in particular chakras, and that brings about mystical insight. Yeah? And then you would from there go on into objective samadhi, that is samadhis or deep trance states that are related to aspects of the world. You know, like for example, a really, really important state would be that you actually physically see that the entire physical universe is the crystallized body of God, and that you actually walk and move inside of a crystalline matrix that literally is the body of God. It's not that God is somewhere up there on a big mountain and this here is not. No, you actually live inside of God like a fish in the ocean, you know. And of course this realization changes you, you know, like even it just touching an object, you're sort of like, oh wow, that's not what I thought what it was, you know. It changes the respect with which you move around in this world, yeah. And then, you know, there are other samadhis after that, the crown of which is of course the so-called objectless samadhi, which brings the let's say submersion in the transcendental aspect of the divine, the infinite consciousness. Yeah? And so the important thing in the yogic path would be, Shankaracharya once said 2000 years ago, it was according to Western history, 1000 years ago, he said, all yogis will reach their goal, albeit in their own time. Yeah? To sort of not be in a hurry, but to say, okay, all right, I have done certain things in the past that created obstacles for myself. I now start chipping away these obstacles, and I don't want to have the hack to sort of cheat my way around. But I accept that lot and, you know, sort of humbly work through that. That's the yogic approach.
Yes. And then, so it's actually really nice to hear about these samadhis, because I have the book but I have not really read it yet. So that's some new concepts to me as well that sound extremely appealing to get into. But so if you would have built up discipline in these different limbs that correspond with these different bodies, and you're far ahead in life, like you're old enough in the right season where you're able to kind of work with these things, then yeah, it's probably a little bit too crass to play it down like this as much. But what would be like the build up of these different practices, and how much time would you need to spend in them in order to have some kind of experience, mystical experience?
I think it's so that really depends on what's called yogunic makeup, and that really depends on your karma.
Well,
so that means if somebody is born as an ancient soul, that means you have lived many embodiments, like trillions of them, and you now come and there is just like a little push required that pushes you over the edge into objectless samadhi. That is possible. There have been people like that, and they may not need to engage into any of the other techniques.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Whereas you may have somebody that is a rather young soul, and they may spend their entire life atasana practice, physical practice, and there's nothing wrong with it. This is sort of like, we expect like an eagle to soar into the sky, whereas a lizard may run over the scurry over the ground, and they are both beautiful in their own right. And they have both their functions in the natural world. So I think it's very difficult to say that each one takes that long, because it really depends on the individual.
Yeah.
But I think that if the technique is practiced with sophistication, and that's the important bit. The thing that we can change is we can practice the technique with sophistication, using all information that we have. Because of course you can say, okay, I do a job in a really, really lame fashion, and instead you can say, I'm going to do that as good as possible, and I will collect all information available to do the job as good as possible. So if we practice with sophistication, we will get, of course, ahead much, much faster. That's the reason why I wrote this series of textbooks, because I was quite fortunate in my life to sort of get hold of all of this information, sort of like often not that I necessarily deserved that, but in some instances I just was in the right place in the right time, and I was in a position that I could spend a lot of time studying these documents, etc. So if that's why it sort of depends how you do things. If you do them really well, technique is great, you can accelerate the process.
Awesome.
And then when you feel that you are drawn to the next level, take that step and take the next level of practice.
Nice.
If you have the desire, not because you think I really should be doing pranayama,
I should be at this level right now.
Should be doing chakra kundalini meditation.
Okay.
It's like, actually I don't have the space in my life, but actually accept where you are.
That's a beautiful nuanced answer and summary to it.
So don't do it because you should, but do it because you really want to. But then it works. Then it will take off.
Awesome. Let's keep it at that for now. I think this is a beautiful way to line it all up. And
thanks for having me. It was a great pleasure.
It was for me like incredible to have this moment and to like actually such a personal conversation, so much time together, to like give my story and the examples, and to hear your responses to it is just for me it was super helpful, and I think it's in general super valuable information that everybody should be aware of. So I'm
cool.
I'm delighted.
Good.
Awesome. Let's wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gregor.
Paradise is not a place. It's a state of being perfectly here.